Hi, I'm Gail Bannock.
And I'm Alana Santone. Welcome to the She Means Business podcast. Throughout our careers, we faced countless questions and sought advice from other women we respect and admire. And that's exactly what this show is about.
Each week, we aim to help you achieve your goals by sharing our experiences and talking with successful leaders, offering real stories, practical advice, and actionable takeaways for women who mean business. All right, let's do this. And welcome back to the She Means Business podcast. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Andrea Janzen, a certified executive coach with an MBA, the host of the Ambition Theory podcast, a Forbes contributor, and a top-rated speaker. She is passionate about coaching women in construction to develop themselves, set aside goals, and achieve outstanding results. Since 2018, Andrea has coached and trained over 1,000 construction professionals, making a real significant impact in this traditionally male-dominated industry. Before transitioning into her role as a coach, Andrea was a marketing leader who worked on some of the world's best-known brands, including Canadian Tire, where we met. Her wealth of experience is in both marketing and executive coaching gives her a unique perspective on leadership and career development. We can't wait to dive into today's conversation and learn from her incredible journey and expertise. So welcome to the show, Andrea. We are so thrilled to have you.
I am so excited to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. You have a very interesting background and you've also landed in a very interesting place. We can't wait to hear how you got there. So why don't you take us through your journey and tell us where you've been and how you got to where you are?
So I started my career in marketing in Toronto, and kind of in my second job, that's where Gail and I met at Canadian Tire. I was working with marketing. And the thing about me is I think I was always meant to be an entrepreneur, but it took me a while to actually realize that goal. And it's really interesting because I wasn't really exposed to entrepreneurship growing up. Like my family had always said, like, get a job, you'll be taken care of. Like that was kind of the mentality drilled into me. And that's what I did. And what was really cool is I had really amazing jobs. So my first job, I got to work on Werther's Original, the candy. My second job was at Canadian Tire, which was incredible. My third job after that was working at Pernod Ricard, like a big global spirits and wine company. So I got to work on Absolute Vodka as a marketing manager, Havana Club, did some really amazing things. I also spent some time in fundraising with World Vision, working on their gift catalog. And my journey was really interesting. So I'm like a go-getter, type A kind of person. And I would get bored easily. I would want to move to the next level. And for me, whenever, I'd work somewhere and I'd be like, I'm ready for the next level. Or when I look back, I realize, I don't love this leader and I can't see them advocating for my future here. So things like that would happen. And I'd be like, I'm not waiting around. I'm going to look for something else. And I think looking back, I was really good at job interviews. So I was able to get jobs relatively easily. And I loved all the jobs that I had, but there was clearly something missing because the longest place I ever stayed somewhere was 3 years. So that's kind of how I started. And I think I had this itch inside of me to become an entrepreneur. And it really started doing career coaching. So literally just helping people with their resume, helping people get ready for a job interview. And I was on my first maternity leave. I have 3 kids. And friends would I'm a type A kind of person. I don't like to just sit at home. So people would ask me to help them with their resume. And then word started to spread. So literally it would be like, people would come over. I'd be like, hold the baby. Let me type your resume. Let's practice some interview questions. So that's how I kind of got my foot into coaching.
Wow. And so now you have this company, Ambition Theory, and it is committed to getting more women into leadership, but specifically focused on in the industry of construction, which I'm dying to know how that came about because you came from a very corporate world, marketing, very not exactly construction. So how did that come about? How did you find your way there?
So that's such a great question. So I started doing career coaching, and then I was like, I should get a certification. So I went to school for executive coaching, and then I learned coaching is so much more than getting a job. That's very transactional, right? I'm like, there's so much, you can help people reach these incredible heights, like change their lives, really advance, bring value to their company. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to switch to leadership coaching. And how the name Ambition Theory came about, this was around 2017. And I don't know, I think, you know how you get those magazines in the mail, like a promotional one, like they would send you a magazine hoping that you like it and then you subscribe. So Chatelaine magazine, like the Canadian women's magazine, came as a free, and I was on like, I think the third child maternity leave. And there was an article that said it was about women's ambition at work. And I think it was a stat like 2/3 of Canadian women would not take their boss's job, even if it was offered to them. And I was like, oh my goodness, like what? And at the time, people were talking about the gender gap at work. That was like kind of a new thing in 2017. People hadn't really talked about it before. And I was like, oh my goodness, how are we supposed to close the gender gap if 2/3 of women are like not wanting to step into that leadership role, even if it's offered to them? So that started my journey in coaching women. So I was kind of mad, like not mad, but fired up. And I posted on LinkedIn about it. And this is what's really cool about networking and LinkedIn and just putting your thoughts out there as a thought leader with an opinion. So I put this opinion out there and someone responded and is like, I liked your post. Can we meet for coffee? And so we did. And she's like, can you make a workshop for this group I'm in, Women in Aerospace? And I said, of course I can. So I made a like a 2-hour workshop called Reignite Your Ambition. It went really, really well. And it was all engineers, technical professionals in that setting. And the content landed really, really well with them. So I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And kind of, I'm like this young entrepreneur and everyone's like, put yourself out there, speak at conferences, like just do whatever it takes. And so my husband got me into construction. He works in construction and his company was sending women to this Women in Construction conference. It was actually in San Francisco, so very far from Halifax. So he forwards it to me. He's like, oh, look how amazing my company is. Look at what they're doing. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, who are the speakers? Like, what are they talking about? I'm just curious. I'm just soaking it all in. And there was a TBD on the schedule. And so I cold called the conference and I'm like, do you need a women's leadership speaker? I didn't know anything about construction. And they said yes. So, and this was not a paid speaking gig. This was like, you can speak. We do not pay you. We will give you a free ticket to the conference, but you have to pay for your own flight, your own hotel, all of that. And so, you know what, I sucked it up. I paid for all that. I went. The speaking engagement went really, really well to the point where they had me in this little tiny breakout room, like not the main stage. And like all these people came, like they were sitting on the floor, like they left the door open and they were setting up chairs in the hallway because all these people came just to hear my message. And so I'm like there, even before the talk, I was like, I think I'm onto something here. And then I ended up getting construction clients from that speaking engagement, but I still kept pursuing other industries. So I was going after banking, healthcare, whoever would, nonprofit, like everything. So I was going after all those clients for a while. And then really, I read a lot of small business books. I was just kind of learning about how do you get a small business off the ground. It's really different than working in like a big company because you don't have the budgets, you don't have the credibility. So you really have to be creative. And they all talked about niching down. And I took a marketing course and I remember they had us make a spreadsheet and just segment our customers and answer questions about them, right? Like, how do you feel when you work with them? Like, how willing are they to pay? Like these different questions. And my score was like construction was like 60% of the clients and they were scoring higher than the other segments. So the marketing teacher challenged us for 90 days, just focus on that one segment and see what happened. So that's how I got into construction.
That's it's quite a story, and I'm curious that you kind of self-navigated and self-taught to get to where you are. How did you find that motivation, or what were the challenges you faced as you went through that journey? Because it's quite remarkable.
Well, so thank you, and I so appreciate that because at the time it did not feel remarkable. It felt like a slog. It felt like everyone doubted me, like people didn't take me seriously. So that was all happening as this story was kind of playing out. So I so appreciate you, Alana, for saying that it's remarkable, because at the time it did not feel that way at all. And I think it was just this deep rooted desire to create something larger than myself. Like I'd always worked in brand marketing, and I loved this idea of like building these global brands, and these brands like Canadian Tire, for example, it's like one of the most trusted brands in Canada. And like the fact that I had the privilege to work on that, I'm like, I really understood the value of something bigger than yourself, and that was, I think, one of my goals, is to really build something larger than me. And that's, I think, what kept me going. It's like that grit, that like tenacity. And I think every time I felt like giving up, which was often, I would get like a glimmer, like, oh, a new client would come in from like, I was like, that's a really good company. If I could attract a company like that, I can keep going. I could get another one like that. And then it just that, like, I think when I felt like quitting, something would happen. I would get a sign, and it would be that win that I needed to get over that hump to keep it going.
That's so inspiring. I feel like construction is such a underserved, especially for women, is such an underserved area that what a breath of fresh air you are. And I'm sure, I know that you've helped so many. We're curious, as a coach, specifically for women, what are the commonalities that you see? Kind of what advice do you find yourself giving them often? Is there anything?
Yeah, so I thought about this before, because I know your audience is not construction, and I am so dialed into my clientele, the industry, like the really like heavily male populated industries. But one thing that we've recognized and that we teach is the leadership model of like transactional versus transformational. And so this is not unique to construction. It's not unique to ambition theory. Other researchers have studied this for many years. So transactional is that traditional like top-down approach. Like, I'm the leader, my job is to set the vision and then delegate to the team, give them praise when they're doing a great job, critical feedback when things are going wrong. But it's really based on my years of experience as the leader in downloading the instructions to the team. So that's the transactional approach. The transformational approach is different. So I'm the leader, I set the vision, but instead of telling people what to do, I invite them in to rise to the challenge. I help them figure out what their strengths are and align that to the tasks that need to be done to reach the goal. And it's more collaborative, and it's about inspiring people so they want to contribute versus being told to contribute. And so we've done our own research, and we've found amongst construction professionals, but other researchers have studied this in other industries, women are naturally more transformational, men are naturally more transactional. In construction, and even like 5 years ago, just leadership in general, there was just more men in high-level leadership positions than women. It's nobody's fault. It just is. And so if you think about how companies decide who gets promoted, who should I invest in, who should I be, on that succession plan, usually what they do, they take the most successful leaders, reverse engineer the behaviors, write them down, recruit for that, develop for that, identify that. So the boxes that you're checking, who should I be hiring for this leadership role? Who should I be investing in? Who should I be training? It's usually based on transactional behavior. So like gives feedback, has difficult conversations, manages a budget. But those transformational leadership skills typically don't show up, like collaborates, inspires, helps people see their strengths. There's usually not that box to check. So a big challenge that women face is that there's like they don't have the box for the skills that they're bringing to the table, which can be so valuable to a company. So usually women's path is a little bit slower than men's.
Well, and it sounds like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you're just going to keep hiring men if you're hiring for men or qualities that men are more likely to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. So that's one thing. And then the second thing that we are literally, I'm a big proponent of, and it's really interesting. I've been talking about sponsorship. So my very first Forbes article was called Women Stop Asking for Advice and Do This Instead. And it was really outlining the details of the difference between sponsorship versus mentorship. And 6 years later, that is still my keynote topic. And every time I give it, people's minds are blown. So I will talk about it until people are like, Andrea, I'm so bored of this content. I have my sponsor. It's working for me. My company has adopted it. And so the main difference, and this shows up in any industry because I wrote this before I even really niched down to construction. But men and women are mentored differently. So women and what we call the whole thing mentorship. So for women, it's like you ask the mentor, so the experienced person, either in your company, in the industry, what do I need to do to advance? And they're like, read this book, go to this conference. They'll like tell you a story about how they advanced. Maybe they'll drop names of like influential people in your industry, and you're like pumped, excited. You're like, I'm going to go do this. And then you get back to your job or office, wherever you work, and you're like, okay, I read the book, I went to the conference. Now what? How do I implement this? This advice was great, but I need to figure out on my own how to implement it. So that's a typical mentorship relationship, whereas men are actually mentored differently. So for men, it's like, okay, you go to that mentor and you're like, I want to get ahead. And they're like, well, guess what? Like, I'm golfing with like this vice president next week. Come along with me. So then you build that relationship. You get to know their goals. You tell them your goals, and then you're like, well, actually, I want to get into business development. And they're like, well, we're pitching a client next week. Come with me. I'm presenting 10 slides. You present 2. And, oh, you know what? If you screw up, it's okay. I'm there. I can step in to ensure that it's successful. And that is typically, research shows, and this isn't my opinion, research in construction and research in other industries have shown this. And so if you think about who is going to advance faster, is it the man who's getting the opportunity and gets to learn as they go, or the woman who's being prepared for the opportunity? And what's really fascinating is that nobody does this on purpose. No one's like, I'm going to treat these two people differently. It's totally unconscious bias. But the kicker is that it's out of good intentions. It's like, I want her to be successful. I don't want her to fail. I want her to knock it out of the park when the opportunity comes. And what happens when we're actually held back from those riskier opportunities, that exposure, being able to show like, I've done this. I can check the box because I've done it, versus like, I'm prepared if it ever happens. And so if women can shift their mindset from advice to opportunity, that is like the game changer, and it will lead to like exponential growth.
Well, it sounds like women are being prepared for nothing, for the opportunity that never comes, but they're just really prepared for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get like right down to brass tacks.
Yeah.
So you just said something very profound. I'm tracking. I'm tracking this line of conversation. We love this conversation. But like, I'm sitting here listening and I don't know, okay, tell me what to do. Like, tell me, you just kind of said a bunch of like, don't do this, do that. But like, I hear you, but like, tell me what it is I should be doing. Like, that's really tangible.
Okay. That's really tangible is, I don't know if you're going to like this answer. It is a mindset shift. Really, it's about approaching every relationship from an opportunity. And I'll give you an example of actually how I've been using this in my career lately. And this is actually new language that I haven't shared publicly yet. So this is the first time. And so if you think about a mentoring relationship, it's like me, you're like, oh, Andrea, how do I start a podcast? I'm like, okay, you could like get Riverside, you could get a producer, you could make a script. I could tell you all these things. And you're just like, I'm just overwhelmed, right? I'm not helping you, right? Or I could be like, you know what? I have a podcast. Why don't you come on my podcast and you can see what it's like? So that's a different mentality, right? So if I'm just telling you, it's like we're together, 1 + 1 = like 1.1, right?
Oh my God. I love that. Because I'm thinking, we were talking about this before we aired, that Andrea, I came on your podcast and it was my first podcast. And that experience gave me the strength or the confidence to go appear on another podcast and another podcast. And then when Elena and I were talking about the possibility of this crazy idea of launching our own podcast, well, guess what? I felt prepared for that because I'd already been on so many podcasts. So the best way to it wasn't about reading on how to start a podcast. It was that confidence that came from experience. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, totally. So
mind is blown.
Okay, your mind is blown. Okay, so just stay with me. So then if you think about like a relationship, right? So the mentorship is really like the 1 + 1, so 2 people, and you're creating like 1.1 of value. But the way that I like to see sponsorship, it's a 1 + 1 = 3. That's what I like to aim for. So I'm coming to the table with some value, right? I'm coming to the table with a value. You're coming to the table with some value. And if we pursue something together, and it doesn't need to be so formal like a job, a contract. It could just be like a relationship, a podcast interview. We're going to aim to create a 3. And that really means like if I tried to do this by myself, it would be a 1. If you try to do this by yourself, it'd be a 1. But if we try to do it together and we're only at 1.5, it's not worth it. And that relationship's going to burn out over time because you're getting nothing back. And so it's really about that energy that you're bringing to it. It's like, instead of in a mentoring relationship, the biggest, I think, place where people get stuck is you make it about you, right? It's like, you help me, give me, provide for me. And if you think about the longevity of that, right? If you're like that senior, if you're the mentor and you got to meet the traditional mentoring relationships, like we meet for coffee once a month, blah, blah, blah. If you're not getting anything back, you're going to burn out. The relationship's not going to last. So the best way to do, if you're like that mentee and you're really looking for that sponsor, it's like flip the script. Instead of it being about me, make it about them. What are their goals? What are they working towards? And what can you bring to the table to help them?
I wanted to just ask a little bit of a follow-up question or change gears a little bit, but by the time this podcast is released, you will have published a report. I saw you kind of featuring it called The Leadership Shift Construction Needs, and it starts with women. Tell us about that, because that sounds really cool and interesting.
Okay. Oh, I love that our construction report is like sucking you in. Shout out to Amanda, she's our marketing team member, that like came up with that copy. So great job, Amanda. It's really about transformational leadership. So we kind of realized that in this work with women, that the industry really needs this. So I'll tell you something that happened yesterday. So we have an 8-week online leadership course. And in week 5, we bring back alumni to talk about what they've learned, how they're applying it, and the outcomes that they've got. And yesterday, this woman came. She's in sales, and she's in charge of the entire Western U.S. And she sells construction products, right? Not super sexy product, but she sells construction products. And I asked her, so she's a guest speaker, and I'm like, okay, what did you learn? And she said, well, I learned I was being too transactional in my job. So this course helped me to be more transformational. And what is really, really interesting, she said, I'm in sales. I'm a salesperson. And this is a really big thing for women that I've noticed. Women do not like to own the role of salesperson. It's icky, it's gross, they avoid it. And so interesting. So while she's in the course with us, her manager said, you're an influencer. I want you to be an influencer. And she's like, no, I'm a salesperson. But at the same time, she's taking our leadership course, learning about transformational leadership. She starts being transformational with her team. So she's a leader of sales reps. So she has a whole team of salespeople. And I asked her, really tell me the nitty gritty details of how you, it's like, oh, I was more transformational. That sounds really airy-fairy. So she said the conversation she would have with her sales reps were like, what's the best product to solve this customer's problem? That's the new conversation. The old conversation was, how many units do we need to sell to reach the month's target? And so it was really interesting. Then I asked her, I was like, well, how did your sales reps behave after? So the sales reps, instead of be like, what's the margin on this product so that I can calculate how much we're going to make? It was like, here's the customer's problem. I need some help, brainstorming on like what's the best way to approach this problem. So more open-ended conversations, more transformational conversations. So that is really what she did. So she shifted from being a salesperson, which is like, want to buy this thing and it's going to cost this and we're going to make this, to more being a relationship with the customer and looking at that problem, being curious, and challenging her salespeople to actually listen to the customer and bring that up to her and have those conversations. And I asked her, I'm like, what's the return on investment? Like, you're in sales. What is that? Literally, tell me the numbers. And she said for 5 years, their sales were red. So they measure success red, yellow, green. So 5 years of red. And she finished our course in December. And right now it's the end of February. So not that long. And she's like, sales from our region are now green. So if we can unlock those transformational leadership skills inside the women that are already there, more are going to come in and thrive.
Great. Well, really interesting stuff. And we like to conclude our podcast with the same question with all of our guests, which is, what advice would you give your younger self with all the experience and variety that you've had? Looking back, what is that advice you'd give yourself?
I think to lean into those sponsorship relationships. So when I look back, it is so clear I had so many sponsors, but I didn't know how it worked, right? Because everybody said mentorship, go for coffee, ask them their story. No one said, bring value to the table, Andrea, leverage their connections, help them, and you can create this beautiful thing. I didn't learn about it till I was like 35, 36, which I think was too late. So if I would tell my younger self, it's like lean into those relationships and really look at it from like that win-win, 1 + 1 = 3 perspective, because I think things would have happened for me a lot faster if I had known this earlier.
That's great. And I think it's a really important lesson for everyone. And it strikes me, as you've been talking about construction, that really the leadership journeys for most people, whether it's in construction or any other industry, the principles of these are very applicable. So thanks for being here today, Andrea. It's been wonderful to talk to you and get all the lessons that you've imparted on us. And we'll look forward to seeing what's to come from the Ambition Theory podcast and your business and how you make out with your coaching.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Andrea.
Thanks.
She is awesome. I just, her energy is fantastic. You can see the grit, the, not giving up, the persistence. And I'm just so impressed that she found this niche. I feel like it's a well of opportunity, because what a perfect, finding an industry that needs help and then being an expert in that field, I think is just so smart. She said a lot of things that really resonated. One, I think we often talk about sponsorship versus leadership. We've had previous guests who've talked about that as well. Kristen Shane did a fantastic job talking about it. And she actually totally blew my mind. This idea of looking for opportunities to bring women along as a potential sponsor. I really have to think about that and how I'm going to do that, because I love that. I've never thought about it.
Yeah, I think her comment on 1 + 1 is 1.2, and sponsorship is 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting concept because, and I loved the title of that article, by the way. Don't look for advice, look instead for this, or look for this instead. I love that. I think it's, I was reflecting on it more from a mentorship or sponsorship perspective than actually the mentee. But I think about myself earlier in my career, and it was really, how do you find those people who are like, do you just fall into them? Like I have had sponsors in my career, but did I look for them? Did I seek them out as she described, or did it just happen? And what happens if it doesn't happen? You need to seek them out.
Yeah.
And so this notion of actually looking for that, and Kristen said it as well, this two-way, like how do you benefit them as much as they benefit you, and how do you find how you can support them, and then the magic that happens through that. I think there's something there that we
and
need to explore.
I love how she put it, because as more senior women, and we are more likely to act as sponsors or should, because we have the ability to. I think this idea of the younger generation has a lot to offer that we could look into and kind of benefit from. As a sponsor, take advantage of young people around you. Seek out potential people to sponsor, people that impress you, because they can, the younger generation is better at technology. They have access to information. They think about things differently, whether it's AI or social media, or they just approach, you're not just wise and experienced. Those days are, I think, over. This idea that the older and wiser person knows more. I think it can be much more of a symbiotic relationship if you give it a chance. And I love that she said that. Again, I had never really thought of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that the notion of going and seeking out people to sponsor, or when you see them, that you have an active role in that sponsorship, just like they are looking for someone to sponsor them, is really important. And I think, it ties a little bit. Sponsorship and mentorship is a topic that I'm sure we'll revisit many, many times. And as you talk to different people have different perspectives on it. I really liked also the way she talked about transactional versus transformational leadership. Yes. It really resonated for me, just in terms of what I have observed in my career in terms of the differences. And again, we're always commenting in generalities. Nothing is like black and white, but that men typically fall into that transactional and women in that transformational. I resonate with that a little bit in terms of what I've observed in my career in terms of the differences, and where, oftentimes, women gravitate to certain roles and men to others. Is that why? Is that kind of how it's defined? Very interesting.
Well, and, if I play along with the generalizations, I think, the transactional leadership works for men, but the transformational leadership works for men and women. Like, when I think of the people and how people want to be led, I've worked for several organizations that were very male dominated, and they were asking for those, leadership styles that are typically, they sound more transformational. They are more feminine. They were looking for somebody to listen to them. They were looking for somebody to support them. They were looking for, a soft place to fall, not an angry, accusing, you did this wrong place. Like, that's a hard place to be. And who wants to be led that way?
Yeah, it's, and when you think about the times and where we're going in terms of the pace of change, and how, companies just need to be constantly reinventing themselves and transforming, does that provide a new opportunity for these skills to kind of come front and center and provide opportunities to build those skill sets as you go? And then how do we, from a hiring perspective and from an organizational culture and recognition perspective, identify and value this notion of transformational leadership, not as something different, but as something welcome and really something that's complementary almost to the transactional. I'm not suggesting one is better than the other, but it's certainly room for both, and probably very complementary in terms of the leadership styles. So a lot to really ponder in both of those topics. So
agreed.
Really well done. Nice to
Thanks,
meet her.
Andrea. Thanks for listening to this episode of She Means Business. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and head over to our show notes where you can find helpful links and summaries of key points from the episode. We'd also love to hear from you on LinkedIn or Instagram, so please follow and DM us at the She Means Business podcast. See you next time.